So I want to talk about our temperature split. We've had several misdiagnoses of this bad boy and other random issues I feel like from going back and doing callback review and looking at readings, which is great to have readings in there, that it could have been caught based on temperature split. But when you talk about temperature split, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
20 degrees.
20 degrees, yeah. So we have a 20-degree rule of thumb for our temperature split. So what makes our temperature split 20 degrees? Why do we end up around 20 degrees? All right, it's a design target for the AC. The manufacturer designs that our compressor and how much refrigerant it's moving and the temperature of that refrigerant compared to the amount of air coming across our coil is going to produce a 20-degree temperature drop in the air coming across that coil. So it's a design target, that's why we have a nice decent rule of thumb there. And so when you have something outside of that 20-degree range, we've either changed our air or we've changed our refrigerant flow to the coil, right? So what are the things that can change the refrigerant flow to the coil?
Restriction, loss.
Restriction, this bad boy, or what was that?
Loss of refrigerant.
Loss of refrigerant. Low in refrigerant.
Overcharge.
Or overcharge. Yeah, we could have a piston like this, and we're just dumping too much into our coil. And too much creates a warmer coil, right? So we don't affect the air as dramatically as we want to. We don't have as high of a temperature split. So when we think about the air coming across the coil, what is that? The air, it's not the air itself, but it's the heat that the air is carrying, right? It transfers into that. And so that heat that the coil picks up is called our coil load, okay? So if we have a system that is giving us a 23-degree split, what is that telling us about the combination of our refrigerant in our coil and our airflow?
Low airflow.
Lower
Lower
airflow, right?
Yeah.
Does 20-degree split sound like a problem? Or a 23-degree split? Not really, right? Like, it makes you think twice, like, what's going on here? But it doesn't really sound like a problem. It just means something in that target is slightly off. And we often do like a plus or minus 3 degrees, right? But it's important to know what's causing that. What's causing that difference? If we have a 25-degree split, okay, now we're all a little bit uncomfortable about what we're seeing. What's causing our high split? Sorry guys, I didn't sleep much this weekend, I'm trying to talk here. What's causing our high split and what's not causing it on this picture?
We have an impacted coil, but we're going to say it's TXV.
Okay, my guy. Love this.
Because that's what happened, right?
Yeah. This is hot air. This is colder air.
It comes out green.
All right, so he says impacted coil. That's good. What is impacted coil in the terms that we're talking about today?
Debris in the coil.
Debris in the coil, sure. But impacted coil just means that the coil is getting less heat. Yeah, less of a load. And that's because the heat comes from the air, the impacted coil is slowing down how much air is actually passing through that coil, so there's less heat on the coil. Why does less heat on the coil create a higher split?
Allows it to get colder,
Allows the air to get colder,
the coil to get a little
the
colder.
coil to get colder. Good, perfect, exactly right. So why does the coil get colder?
Because it's not heated. Doesn't heat the refrigerant.
'Cause what?
Saturation point goes lower on the refrigerant.
Saturation point goes lower, yeah. So the manufacturer has designed a system that runs in a balance. Like everything works together and affects other parts of the system, right? So you have a unit, let's say that has 3 tons of refrigerant passing through it. And it's designed for 3 tons of air to come through this coil. Now, based on how refrigerant flow works through this metering device, it's dropping and pressure and it's boiling, it's really cold throughout the coil. As the heat comes in, it actually raises the pressure. As it absorbs heat, it raises the pressure and finishes that boiling process in the coil, right? So you need enough refrigerant to create a very cold coil, but not so much that it doesn't match the amount of heat coming through here. Then you would have a really cold coil that could move down into the freezing temperatures, right? So let's say you had a 3-ton coil, but only a 1-ton blower, right? So we're moving 3 tons of cold refrigerant, only 1 ton of air coming across here. Or a clogged filter, only allowing 1 ton of air through, or a clogged coil, only allowing 1 ton of load. We'll just call it load from here on, maybe that will work. And so it's working in a balance. So, but in no situation will you ever have a high temperature split, 25-degree temperature split, and it's because you have a failed TXV. Right? A failed TXV is restricting how much refrigerant is coming into this coil. So the issue that we're experiencing is a warm coil. We actually have less refrigerant than we need to keep this coil really cold. The issue we're experiencing is a warm coil. And when you have a warm coil, what's that going to do to our temperature split?
It's gonna drop this split.
Lower the split. We're not going to have as much of a heat transfer across that. Does that make sense? So when we're diagnosing something difficult like a TXV, and we're taking all of our different measurements to look for clues that we're getting it right, one of those key measurements is our temperature split. Now, if you have a really high, let's say your symptoms look like a failed TXV, you're pretty worried about it, you check your temperature split, you have a really high temperature split. What do you need to do in that situation? Yeah. So we check airflow, right? We know at that point we have plenty of refrigerant coming into this coil. Because our airflow split is so high, there's actually, in the balance, there's much more refrigerant, cold refrigerant, than I have heat coming across this coil. So what's another thing that could cause less heat coming across the coil instead of a restricted filter or clogged evaporator?
Blower running on a low stage.
Blower running really low, yeah. What else?
Insulation sucked up.
Insulation pulled in, blocking either the filter or the blower.
That's
Yeah.
a big one on Infinities, because it'll fail the static pressure test, but it's only because the insulation sucks up to it.
Yeah, it's good. That is a big one. And on the Infinities, they will rev up really high and pull insulation off the side panels. So yeah, insulation design's gotten worse with Carrier. Yeah, that's a good one. What's another thing?
Water in the return on a mobile.
Okay, blockage in the ductwork. Yeah. Yeah, what's another thing that could cause less of a heat load on the coil?
You could,
Not being cold in the house.
That's exactly right. Were you gonna say something else?
no, I was gonna say like if your supply is Well, it's high static, like if
High
it's
static.
crushed, then you
Yeah,
just.
like
have a lot of
dampers are
pressure.
closed.
Yeah,
And we're not moving, it's packed against something, so
Yeah.
we're just not moving air through. It's backing up. Yep, that's good. So, I wanted to talk about low temperature in the house. Low temperature in the house means that we're still moving the same CFM, we're still moving that volume of air that we're designed for. We're still moving 3 tons of air across this coil. But what has changed inside our living space?
humidity,
Humidity has come down,
then the temperature.
and temperature has come down. Well, maybe not humidity has come down, but at least the amount of moisture in the air has come down. We have less of a heat load across this coil. So now when we look at our pressures, we're seeing some very low pressures. I've had a few calls recently where somebody was going off with a thermostat's displayed temperature instead of a probe in the return. Probe in the return, 68 degrees, thermostat was showing 72. 68 degrees is going to put our coil very close to freezing. We don't have a failed TXV. We have a TXV doing its job of backing off on the refrigerant because we have a very cold coil, right? So it's very important to understand it's not just air movement, it's heat load on our coil. What is the heat load on our coil? So if you don't remember anything from this class, I want you to remember that a high temperature split means that there's enough refrigerant in your coil. It's being fed proper amount of refrigerant. We need to investigate airflow and forget everything else. Airflow is what we're going to look to. And so now the second part of our class is going to be target split. You guys know how to find what target split should be? How do we do it? How do we find our target split? Because the 20 degrees is a rule of thumb, right?
Mhm.
How do we find target split?
Measure.
measureQuick? Okay. How do you do it on measureQuick? No clue. Okay.
I don't use it anymore.
Alright, so we need a new way. HVAC app. Let's just pull it out. HVAC app. I got either I'm deaf or I got no answers from anyone, so everybody pull out the app. Tools. And I see on the third one down, superheat and delta T. So we add our condenser dry temperature, a return wet bulb, and a return air dry bulb. You notice at the top, it says calculated target for 400 CFM per ton. 400 CFM is the standard across our entire country for how much airflow is designed to pull across this. 400 cubic feet per minute. We do things slightly different in Florida, right?
350.
350, exactly. 350 is our target in Florida. We slow it down just slightly for a colder coil, more condensation, a little more humidity focus. So we're aiming at 350. So if this thing tells you a 16 degree split is the target, it's probably 17 or 18. If you have a properly set up 350 per ton AC system. Now on carriers, it can be quite easy. Typically the tube, which is coming from the manufacturer, the tube blower tap is your 350 per ton. If you have multi-stage, then you actually have to read your set points and look at the manufacturer specs, or if you have another brand, you have to look at the blower data to know whether you're set at 350 or 400, which is now why we go back again to our general rule of thumb, which is 20 degrees. Because you do have some give between 350 and 450. All right, so with that in mind, there is a little bit of room. You can give your grace a little bit, your split a little bit of grace, right, within 3 degrees. So let's go back to, if you were to enter in, what is the dry bulb outside, and then return wet bulb. What do you need to enter a return wet bulb?
Psychrometer.
Psychrometer, exactly right. You have to have a psychrometer to understand what your temperature split target should be. Why is that important?
Yeah.
Why is that required?
Humidity, again, it's sensitive.
Humidity, yeah. sensible versus unsensible heat. There is a lot of heat that this coil is going to absorb that's not measured on a temperature probe. It's measured in moisture. And so I have got a lot of calls this year with very worried technicians spending way too much time on a call because their split was 14 degrees, and that's not 20.
You know, hot pull down.
Yeah, and we are either in a hot pull down, or it's 96 degrees outside and the home's 80 degrees. We have a poorly insulated home with a lot of humidity, and it is exactly on target. I had them enter this in or look it up on measureQuick, and our split was exactly what it was supposed to be. So let's talk about why that could happen real quick. We have the blower still pulling 350 CFM across the coil, but just like in the really cold house, we have the opposite effect. A lot more heat is in our air. Same amount of CFM, but a lot more heat. More moisture, more heat. Compressor, valve, coil, designed still for the 3 tons. But now our home has much higher load than just 3 tons coming across that. That design temperature that they're aiming for it's different today because we have really hot outside or really hot inside. Or you just fixed an AC. And so this is where having a tool that can measure how much moisture is in the air and the temperature, and then give you a realistic target, can save you from looking for a problem that doesn't exist, but also understanding your AC just a little bit better. Now you come into a home and you have your refrigerant pressures all look great. You have a 14 degree split, and it's 75 degrees inside the house, and humidity is, let's say the humidity is 65. What is your instincts on what needs to happen? What needs to change in this home? 75 degrees, humidity 65, pressures all look great.
Heat strips.
Okay, heat strips, very good, very good. That could change our split dramatically. If we have a 5-ton system and a 5 kW heat strips, which would be a bad combo, but we definitely see it out there, you're still gonna get 15 degree split. That 5 tons is gonna overpower that 5K. And so that can be a hard one to find. Good call. What's the first thing we're looking at changing?
Humidity.
Okay, that's the problem we need to address, but I mean changing on the system.
Blower speed.
Blower speed, yeah. So the problem we need to address is humidity and comfort. What we're looking to change is our blower speed. It looks like everything's where it should be, except for we have this really low split, which is giving us a clue that the ratio of refrigerant to air is off. Our pressures tell us we have enough refrigerant, but our temperature split tells us we have a lot more load on this coil than what it's designed for. So we can bring back this temperature split, this blower speed, bring it down. And so investigating what could have changed if this is a new thing, that's part of your diagnostic process on the job. If this is a new system, a new setup, whatever it is that could have changed. Maybe there normally is a 4-inch filter in and now there's no filter in. You look at something like that could dramatically change the airflow. And then understanding if you're getting called out because the house is not reaching temperature point. If you lower the blower speed, is the house going to reach temperature point any better? No. It'll focus more on dehumidification, maybe be slightly comfortable, but you might even see a little bit worse performance on hitting your temperature point. So when you go to adjust the blower speed to try to change split, which means you're going to focus more on dehumidification, you're going to make that coil colder. You're going to let the air pass a little slower across the coil and drop off more moisture. You need to make sure it's a situation where the AC is actually keeping up in the home and it's hitting temperature just fine. Perfect scenario would be a lot of short cycling, it only runs for a couple minutes, hits temperature, shuts off. We can dramatically lower that blower speed. We can put it in constant dehumidification. If it's still hitting their set point, but now really focusing on dehumidification, that's great. But the concepts you need to grasp here is that we are designed to have this balance, this ratio of air to coil, refrigerant in the coil, air to refrigerant, or heat to refrigerant, load to the load transfer device, which is our refrigerant. This ratio to give us about 20-degree split. That's what we're designed for. When that's off, we either have less refrigerant, too much refrigerant, less air, or too much air. Let's not diagnose TXV and refrigerant issues when we see a really high split. We know we have plenty of refrigerant, very cold coil. We have a low suction temperature, we have a high split, we have all the refrigerant we need. All of this is doing its job great. Let's focus on our air. We have a very low split, now we need to look at, or a high split, now we need to look at, are we overfeeding our coil, perhaps? Or are we overfeeding our heat, the air coming through here, right? So, all right, sweet. Hopefully that was helpful. Takeaways, high split, only airflow. And use your target calculator. Start to get more of a feel for what we're aiming at. If you use this a lot on systems that are performing great with 20-degree split, and this thing gives you a 19 every time you see 21, then you'll start to understand a little bit of the difference between the 400 CFN that this is set up for, and the fact that all of Florida is designed for the 350 CFN per ton. So that can kind of just help you understand where that slight difference will be. Also measureQuick, you can literally enter in that your airflow is 350 per ton, and then that'll calculate the split. So, if there's anybody still using measureQuick. Any questions?
Yeah, so just confirming, so if the house is really cold already and the system been running for a while, the split is gonna be less.
Okay, so that's a good question. Actually, cold house can be a little bit tricky on the split. The cold house situation that I brought up is not really related to the split as much as it's understanding that we have less of a heat load, so we have we have a lower refrigerant pressures.
I have seen where the pressures was lower, but the split was actually lower too. It wasn't like crazy, it was like more like 14, 16, but it was because they don't have that much heat
Yeah.
to inject from it.
So the reason is because that our coil is still trying to stay above freezing, but our air temperature is now closer to freezing. So we don't have as extreme of a difference between our really cold coil and our hot air. The bigger difference between temperature, the faster heat transfer happens. So if you have there's a lot more heat transfer with a higher temperature and a lower temperature. And so, and when they touch each other, the heat transfer happens faster. Whereas if the home temperature is closer to the coil temperature, then you're not gonna get that much of a split. So a lot of times what you see happening is as temperature in the house goes down, the coil stops lowering pressure at some point. It could be the metering device no longer can restrict to that point, which is great, it's keeping it above freezing, or the piston, just design, your coil's not gonna go much colder than maybe 36 or 40, it could be 40 that it's stuck at, but your house temperature keeps coming down. So the coil's staying the same temperature, but the air coming in is lower, and so yeah, you don't have the transfer of heat that happens quite as fast. So, but
What about subcool and superheat in those instances? Because I get a lot of calls from techs that they get fixated on the subcool superheat numbers,
yeah,
and they want to condemn a TXV prior to
yeah.
that full airflow inspection, just based off of those.
Yep, that's good. If you have subcool maybe that's a little bit lower, and typically your superheat's a little bit lower on a cold house too. And it can be pretty confusing on what's going on. When you have less heat entering into your refrigerant, the overall volume of refrigerant comes down because I might be using the wrong word there. The pressure of your refrigerant comes down because when the heat interacts with refrigerant, it increases its pressure, right? So even your head pressure comes down throughout your system, especially if it's been running for a long time. So then your subcool gets lower. And then if your subcool's lower, then less liquid is hitting that metering device, and sometimes your metering device will actually starve your coil slightly in that situation, and then you'll have a higher superheat, and it can look like something's wrong. But when you walk into the house and it's cold, it's very cold, you've got a 70-degree on your temperature, on your thermostat, let's not go starting to diagnose problems and replacing things on the AC to get it to cool better. It's already cooling above average. So you can kind of just understand, okay, I might be seeing numbers that are confusing to me, I should talk to somebody about what's going on here, but we don't have an uncomfortable customer. I'm here on a maintenance, this is obviously overperforming. It's good to get knowledge on why I might be seeing, but yeah, there are other weird situations that add a little bit of trickiness to this.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Especially during our winter maintenances.
That's true. Yeah.
High superheat,
Yeah.
low subcool.
Visticate is a huge one for that, yeah. You still sometimes have a heat load inside, but outside where the condenser is, it's pretty cold. And that can happen in the rain as well, where your pressures get thrown off, but yeah.
And not enough runtime on the system. They'll test and wrap up in 10 minutes, where that long of a line set, you need at least 15-20 minute runtime.
Because I've had a 36 superheat down at the condenser, because you can't, on the 4th floor, you can't like Bluetooth it.
Yeah.
You can walk back and forth, but
Yeah.
I've had a 36 superheat at the condenser
And be
and
completely
we have a
happy.
21-degree
Yeah.
split, so.
Yeah, that's a good word. But the point is understanding these dynamics and how they interact with each other, the ratio of heat to refrigerant, then you can start walking through what's going on here, why am I seeing these weird numbers, how is this happening?
Thanks for watching. If you're willing, give this video a thumbs up and drop us a comment. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay updated with all of our future videos. And as a quick reminder, HVAC School isn't just a YouTube channel. Dive deeper with us at our main website, hvacrschool.com. Curious for more knowledge on the go? We've got you covered. Tune into the HVAC School podcast, available on all your favorite podcast apps. And while you're at it, join our thriving Facebook group. Also, don't miss out on our free mobile applications available for both iPhone and Android. We're all about community. For techs, by techs.